bear in mind that the people are not fighting for ideas, for the things in anyone's head. They are fighting to win material benefits, to live better and in peace, to see their lives go forward, to guarantee the future of their children. Hide nothing from the masses of our people. Tell no lies. Expose lies wherever they are told. Mask no difficulties, mistakes or failures. Claim no easy victories. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. God's mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is his faithfulness. If you tremble with indignation at every injustice, then you are a comrade of mine. We brought nothing into the world, and we take nothing out. The Lord gives, and the Lord takes away. We are not liberators. Liberators do not exist. The people liberate themselves. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Hasta la victoria siempre. Blessed are the pure in heart, and blessed are those who build little outposts of heaven here on earth. Let us pray. O love divine, we come into your presence to remember Graeme and to seek your comfort. For we know that nothing can separate us from your love, and that you support us in our sorrow. We are sure that the souls of the righteous are with you and that nothing can harm them. Although they have died, they are in peace. Amen. Alleluia. Alleluia. Please be seated. A warm welcome to all of you gathered here and our friends and family and comrades at the receiving end of this live stream. Special welcome to Cheryl, and we pray that this service will be one of comfort, that will be the seeding of archival memories that you can source in the inevitable difficult days that will lie ahead. To the immediate Corollas and Bloch family, and in the way that you are extended. And we also wish to welcome our band. It was just a glorious moment of sitting just to gather my thoughts, to be reminded of Abdullah Ibrahim's Manenberg amongst the other many gems that you have already gifted us with, and we look forward to your ongoing contribution. Just some household necessities for those who would need the essentials of the toilet. To my immediate left, it's not often you hear clergy encouraging you to go left, but please, you are most free to do that in this time. And then we are still within that season of COVID. I asked you to be mindful that no singing is allowed, sing mani art. And also please make sure that your masks are always not a fashion statement, but you cover your chin and also your nostrils. These are not gifts that we want to share with anybody, so please be mindful of that. The service, we are really intent on keeping it within the 2 hours, and there will be more information forthcoming. But finally, I'd also just want to extend the welcome of our Cathedral, of myself, our wardens, Catherine and Arthur, and then our illustrious Archbishop Emeriti, Desmond Tutu, and also Jongonkulu Dungani. Our present Archbishop Thabo Makgoba also wishes to extend a welcome to all of you, and just to reaffirm, Cheryl, the message that he had sent you in the course of this week, that God's love is constant and his mercies never come to an end. This is a place where Graeme was most familiar, both in his attendance, but also in terms of the 3 names that I had just mentioned. And so it is our own institutional joy to be part of the ceremony and to be part of the process of honoring and celebrating one who told no lies, claimed no easy victories, and it was a steadfast sojourner through our lives and in this place. So Edith, Bafundisi, my apologies. We have here Rashida and also Lyle, representing the diversity of our Abrahamic faiths, and it's good to have you with us. And then my fellow sharer of the baton of continuity, Edith Fries, I do welcome you, and I surrender the lectern joyfully to you.
Good morning. Can we ask you to stand for the playing of the national anthem?
Israel, Cheryl, Bloch family, and the Carolus families, ladies and gentlemen. The preamble to the Constitution. We, the people of South Africa, recognize the injustices of our past, honor those who suffered for justice and freedom in our land, respect those who have worked to build and develop our country, believe that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. We therefore, through our freely elected representatives, adopt this Constitution as the supreme law of South Africa, so as to heal the divisions of the past, establish a society that is based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. Lay the foundations for a democratic and open society in which government is based on the will of the people and every citizen is equally protected by the law. Improve the quality of life for all citizens and free the potential of each person. Build a united and democratic South Africa that is able to take its rightful place as a sovereign state in the family of nations. Africa. Morena boluka setjhaba sa heso. God seën South Africa. God bless Africa. Mudzimo fatuchetsa Afrika, hosi katekisa Africa.
Thank you. You may be seated. I'm Edith Fries, and I'd like to join the Dean of the Cathedral, Michael Wieder, in welcoming you and thanking you for joining Cheryl and Graeme's siblings who are here, Sean, Lance, Guy, and Kate, their partners and children, and the extended family present today. We welcome all in the Cathedral and the numbers of people who have joined us virtually. Among those who are in the virtual Cathedral are Graeme's brother Hugh in Australia, Nigel in London, and his sisters Erica in Connecticut and Claire in Singapore. I want to implore each of us to remain hyper-vigilant of the COVID protocols and ask that each of us take responsibility for our own safety and for the safety of fellow mourners. Please keep your masks on throughout the service and outside of the Cathedral. If you are a speaker, you may remove your mask while you're at the podium, while you're speaking, but put your mask back on before you leave the lectern. I know that it goes completely against the grain for us not to touch, hug, and comfort each other at a moment like this. The safest approach is to hug, touch, and reach out with our hands, with our eyes, rather. And we will spend just under 2 hours together paying our last respects to a beloved husband, brother, a dear friend, a revered mentor, a comrade, a confidant. I'd like to acknowledge all of you present, in particular the leadership of the African National Congress, Graeme's political home, and we recognize, I don't want to mention names and exclude people, but I do want to recognize Paul Mashatile, and I believe Panyasa Lesufi is also present. We also want to acknowledge the family and friends who have flown in to be with us today. For example, Cheryl's sister Des, who flew in from London, and others who came from different parts of the country. For many, it was their first flight since the COVID pandemic disrupted our lives to be here. Thank you very much. We have a very tight program, and we will immediately listen to a virtual tribute by the Minister of Education, Angie Motshekga.
Program Director, members of the Bloch family, Comrade Cheryl Carolas and family, members of the media, distinguished guests, friends and comrades. Program Director, comrades and friends, today we mourn. We mourn because a humble son of the soil, a teacher and an educationist of note has departed. We have truly lost one of our own, one of the finest cadres of our times. I knew he was unwell, but as faithful social beings, I had hoped that he will recover. Comrade Bloch is no more. He was, in a literal sense of the word, a humble servant of the people. Comrade Cheryl Carolas, Graeme Bloch's siblings, and close friends and comrades, please accept our sincere condolences as the Education Department, the education community, but also as the ANC that Comrade Graeme so sincerely served. Our president and the ANC leadership also wanted me to pass a message of condolences to the family. We are saying what the Maker had given us. Let us be brave enough to say it is well when he wants it back. May his gentle soul rest in eternal peace. May the family of the deceased, friends and comrades be comforted during these difficult times. Comrade Bloch, he lives an extraordinary life in extraordinary times. His life mirrored the fortunes and misfortunes of his times. He dedicated his life to the struggle till the end. He lived freely, he loved openly, he loved heartily. His life was multi-layered: an anti-apartheid activist, an education activist, an education policy analyst, academic and critic. Yet his public posture was always driven by the revolutionary ideals of a better life for all. He criticized our service delivery record in the basic education because he wanted more for South Africa's children. He always meant well. He spoke on behalf of the marginalized to extract a better bargain for them, not himself. Comrade Bloch particularly grew up in the trenches of anti-apartheid movement. At least he lived to see the fruits of his labor, the post-apartheid South Africa, of which he played a part. For his activism, from a very young age until his demise, he is indeed one of our national heroes and one of our greatest, the likes of Sisulu, Tambos, and the Mandelas. His mother, Comrade Rosalie, was herself a formidable anti-apartheid activist and member of the Black Search. Comrade Graeme Bloch's political activism began when he became involved in the non-racial National Youth Action while a pupil at Westford, where he matriculated with 7 highest results in the Cape Province. When he was 20, he was detained for 2 weeks and banned for 5 years for leading University of Cape Town students in a solidarity march after the June 16 uprisings. When his banning order was lifted in 1981, he immediately resumed open anti-apartheid activism, becoming a founding member of the Detainees Parent Support Committee the very same year. In 1983, he was part of the End Conscription campaign formation and organization that rejected military services under apartheid government. In the very same year, he was part of the launch of the United Democratic Front in Cape Town, what will turn out to be an epoch-making event. Thus, Comrade Bloch became an epitome of what it meant to fight for freedom. Frequently, he needed no title, but a just cause for freedom that drove him eyeball to eyeball with the notorious security branch. He was detained several times, harassed, and spent time in solitary confinement. Today, we are scrambling to invent new superlatives to honestly describe his magnitude and the loss that we are facing. Words like gentle giant, a gentle maverick, an education policy guru, a humble soul, all of them describe him very well. As a true revolutionary, he knew that greatness is buried deep in humility. As they say in the Bible, humility requires the discipline of the tongue. But oh no, characteristics of humility. But he had no discipline of the tongue. He had a sharp tongue and was forthright due to his keen intellect. At once, he was an architect of the outcome-based education, OBE, the South Africa's first post-apartheid curriculum. Yet, he also became an ardent critic of a battery of education reforms and grave challenges that still bedevil the basic education system. He once admitted to being bipolar about the South African schooling system. He said sometimes he was hopeful and more often was depressed by the sheer scale of the problems. Nevertheless, he was one of the few academics to openly admit that OBE policy was not suitable for South Africans' conditions at the time, 12 years after it was unveiled with much fanfare. But what he hated most was the small pace of implementation of our education reforms. He hated policy uncertainty. He was offended by maladministration, lethargy, and corruption. Comrade Bloch was outspoken. Oftentimes, his criticism stung, yet it came from a place of love for South Africa and her people. He loved the ANC, but loved the people of this country even more. He dedicated his entire life to ensure that our nation's young flowers come into full bloom and make us a genuinely proud nation. In his honor, we shall continue to rededicate ourselves to the noble ideas of thrift, honesty, and hard work. We cannot wallow in the ecstasy of freedom while some of our people continue to be trapped in the unending cycle of poverty. We must continue to commit ourselves to deal a decisive blow against lawlessness, land hunger, and lack of basic necessities such as water, electricity, and decent sanitation. I knew that Comrade Bloch believed that our people deserve better. When we pronounce a better life for all in a lifetime, I guess we must mean it in the words and deeds. Comrade Bloch had a sharp mind and an inquisitive disposition. As a result, he didn't suffer fools gladly. Perhaps it was because he was born into the struggle. As we know, he immersed himself in the struggle to end apartheid at a very young age, often attracting the wrath of the apartheid police. Comrade Bloch earned his stripes as a revolutionary extraordinary in the United Democratic Front, in the Detainees Parents Support Committee, the National Education Crisis Committee, where I had the privilege of interacting with him a lot, and the End Conscription campaign, amongst others. Comrade Bloch is now safely in the hands of that immortalized ANC branch in heaven, with the greats such as President Nelson Mandela, O.R. Tambo, Harry Gwala, Albertina Sisulu, Charlotte Maxeke, and many other stalwarts of our movement. In him, we lost a dedicated servant of the people, an activist for education, and an education policy guru. He was hardworking, an honest teacher, a disciplined cadre, a fighter for social justice, and above all, a revolutionary par excellence. What particularly stands out for me with Comrade Bloch is his unrelenting desire for knowledge. He wholeheartedly believes in the mind's power to continuously find answers, even for questions yet to be posed. His zest for academic inquiry knew no bounds. He was indeed a lifelong student of education as a discipline. Therefore, it is no exaggeration to say that Comrade Bloch and the Carolus family and the entire ANC, including its alliance partners and South Africa's people, are today left more destitute since Comrade Bloch's departure. To many, he was a political mentor, a confidante, a friend, and above all else, a disciplined cadre of the people's movement, the ANC. On behalf of our government, Africa's people, we send our deepest and most heartfelt condolences to the Bloch and the Carolus families. We hasten to heartily thank you for having lent us your son. He was indeed one of a kind. We are indeed left poorer without him. A complete picture of him as an accomplished activist teacher emerges in a moving tribute to Comrade Bloch from his Western Cape Students' Congress cadres. They wrote, and I quote, "Farewell, comrade and teacher who got beautiful land. May his great soul rest in eternal peace, and I thank you."
We now invite Lance and Desiree to come up at the same time to do a family tribute and to confine yourselves to the time given to you.
I got to know my brother Graeme a lot better after he died. A few simple words on my Facebook post announcing his death went viral, with over 350 shares directly and indirectly from my posts, with thousands of likes and comments. Not because of my words, but because people from all walks of life, from young lions of the Cape Flats to UCT students who saw his courageous and fiery speeches, from fellow pupils at Westwood High School, from politicians and people of all stripes, both locally and all over the world, from family and close friends. He had, clearly, they all loved him and admired him. President Ramaphosa even offered to give him a 21-gun salute with a state funeral, something the family humbly declined, as Graeme, a humble servant leader to the last, fought not for recognition for himself, but for others, and because it was the right thing to do. Graeme was a South African hero, but he was our brother. So who was he and what shaped him? He grew up in a family of 7 kids, 6 boys and a girl, so many that my mother oftentimes forgot all the names. In order: Nigel, Graeme, myself, Lance, Guy, Hugh, Erica, and Sean. My father later added another 2 girls to a second marriage to Sue, called Claire and Kate. The seeds of his radicalism were planted at the vast Bloch dinner table at 9 Welminster Road in Rosebank, where the Jewish values of justice, compassion, and righteousness were taught by our late parents, Cecil, a plastic surgeon, and Mother Rosalie, a lawyer. Friends who had the courage to visit us for dinner would sit in awe at the level of banter, discussion, sparring, and sometimes flying dinner plates that took place. I don't want to go into his political career because you'll hear and you've heard plenty about that already. But suffice it to say that from an early youth he began to fight for the poor, the marginalized, the dispossessed, those who had no or little voice in the jackbooted corridors of apartheid power. He was a man of bravery. He would not back down. There's a famous speech he made at Jamison Hall where he started with the words, "Friends, comrades, and security police whom I despise." This was, needless to say, not well received in the halls of power and the cells where he was later tortured. The infamous Speaker van Wyk beat him up in front of Speaker's own children as he tried to show them what a powerful man Speaker was. This despite Colonel Besson of the security branch having promised my mother, who demanded reassurances from him at risk to herself, that, "Don't worry, Mrs. Bloch, we won't break any bones this time." They could break his bones, torture him in all kinds of ways, including making him stand for 48 hours at a time during interrogation, solitary confinements, but they never broke his spirit. And whatever they tried, he never talked. He was a man of great courage, willing even to pay with his life rather than betray his principles or his friends. It is true that our family feared that both he and Cheryl would be killed by the regime before freedom rang, but still, he and they fought on. Whilst in conflict with the apartheid state, he at times found himself in trouble even in the relatively liberal climes of UCT. As editor of Varsity, the UCT student newspaper, he was once suspended for attaching the head of the Vice-Chancellor, Sir Richard Late, to the body of the famous naked statue of David, with the title underneath, "No Dress Code at UCT." Apparently, Sir Richard was even a little bit flattered, but the UCT Council was not. I remember visiting Graeme at Polsmoor Prison with my mother and Cheryl in her disguise as my mother's legal clerk. Another time later, this time without me, on his way to the visitor screen, Graeme saw my mother and Cheryl at reception and immediately, strategist that he was, created a stir, demanding to register his complaint at reception. Here he gave Cheryl a long-missed hug and smuggled a letter to her, at the end of which he had written, "When I get out of here, whatever happens, I want to marry you." The romance had really stirred while on the run during the state of emergency in 1985 and was an example then and through the years to many around them of ongoing love and commitment. Graeme protected and cared for his younger siblings while at the same time not being afraid for himself. He ventured into spaces white parents at the time warned their children against, which leads to another state of emergency story. His safe house with Cheryl was once in Bishop Lavis, where he drove a borrowed verlepte Skorokoro Volkswagen Beetle, which broke down and caught fire. Imagine the suspicion and uncertainty at that time, seeing a strange white man walking the streets covered in soot, disguised in a long dark jacket with thick horn-rimmed glasses, which made him look like the now infamous comedian Rolf Harris. Graeme was a true Renaissance man, a brilliant student who became a brilliant educator. He came 7th in the Cape Province in matric results, 1st in the country in English. He was in school plays, in lead roles. He was a great speaker and debater. He wrote poems that were published in the prestigious English Alive and other publications. He loved the mountains and the sea and nature. He played rugby and did karate, taken up late to protect himself, if necessary, from the security branch, and proceeded to become a black belt. He was a member and executive of the Cape Town Junior Town Council. Whatever he did, he clearly did it with passion, no holding back. He was in sense a vulindlela, a pathfinder, for me as the next sibling in age, and then for the other Blochs who followed. At school, at university, with people in the struggle, as Graeme Bloch's brother, I and other Blochs were immediately recognized and welcomed and expected to follow in some way in his footsteps. This was both a blessing and a curse, and it took a while for us to find our own paths. It also led to me and my other siblings having phones tapped and at times being followed by a security branch. Agents would often sit outside in their cars. I remember my mother once taking them coffee to let them know that we were watching them, watching us. Sean was once woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning at Walminster Road by goons with guns during the 1985 state of emergency as they tried to arrest Graeme, who fortunately was safe somewhere else. However, given the nature of Graeme's disguises, Sean was forced to show his ID to prove he was not Graeme. Meantime, another time, Graeme's brother Guy was surrounded at the Community Chess Carnival at Maynardville by similar forces, who got very excited when they discovered he was G. Bloch. That one took rather more convincing. While Graeme and Cheryl did survive the apartheid state and had a joyous wedding outside on the lawn at Walminster Road in 1990, attended by struggle royalty like the Arch, Desmond Tutu, Ma Sisulu, who showed how much they were being respected by being there when she was aching to meet her own children who had just returned from exile. Nelson Mandela and R. Tambo, amongst others, called that day from Lusaka and wished them well on that day, along with the only half-joking admonishment from Madiba that they were not to have children soon, as there's too much work to do to build the new South Africa. An instruction, such was their love for Madiba, that they continued to follow. In later life, Graeme, apart from being a leading educationalist, found himself several new jobs, which he performed with aplomb. A tour guide, when as Mrs. High Commissioner, as we called him, in London, he would show the family and friends around the city when visiting. As a reverend cum rabbi of sorts, when he performed the official rites and married Sean and Vina on 22nd June 2013. Fortunately, they'd already done the legal thing 2 weeks before, or Graeme's marriage non-license might have been revoked, which led to his next job as a happy uncle, having incredible fun bouncing numerous nephews and nieces on his knees. The tragedies that happened later in our and Graeme's life were borne by him with mature acceptance, but he fought on. 5 years ago, before his 60th birthday, he was diagnosed with PSP, progressive supranuclear palsy. As my sister Erica said, trust Graeme to get something extremely rare, not just do the ordinary. As time went on, as the name implied, this terrible neurodegenerative disease ravaged his body while leaving his mind still intact. He was forced to inhabit a wheelchair and later was no longer even able to speak. How hard it must have been to still have a brilliant mind in a wasting body. But Graeme could still hear, and his eyes twinkled when listening, and his trademark chuckle at jokes and stories never left him, even to the end. We are so grateful to Cheryl and later his helper Leah, and close friends for their love, patience, and dedication with which they nursed and cared for him in his last years. The other tragedy which hit him and us really hard was the murder of our mother and her partner of 30 years, Aubrey Jackson, in that same house where Graeme learned to care for the poor and alienated and dispossessed on or around the 3rd of May 2018. Her killers have never been found, a closure we and Graeme would have so wanted. There are some famous Bloch child photos, some of which you will or may see on some of the screens here, including one with all the children except for Sean, who still hadn't commenced school, lined up in our school clothes, and others in later years with Blochs all in a row, from Nigel, the oldest, to Sean, the youngest. We thought we were invincible, that our powerful Bloch wall would last forever. But now our wall is broken. Our mighty oak, Graeme, has fallen. It is really hard. How do we and will we cope? It will be tough, but maybe there's some consolation in the eternal words of Khalil Gibran from the Prophet about death. For what is it to die but to stand naked in the wind and to melt into the sun? And what is it to cease breathing but to free the breath from its restless tides that it may rise and expand and seek God unencumbered? Only when you drink from the river of silence shall you indeed sing. And when you have reached the mountain top, then you shall begin to climb. And when the earth shall claim your limbs, then shall you truly dance. Farewell, Graeme, our beloved brother. With your body no longer broken and your soul no longer fettered, sing, fly, and dance free into the universe. Go gentle into that good night with the love of a grateful nation and of your grieving family.
Hello, I'm Des, Cheryl's sister. Just a quick sort of brief introduction. When Graeme was obviously introduced to the family, I was a bit worried because Graeme, as you know, was very quiet. My sister's very wild. And we were always sort of wondering how this was going to work. But in no time, it became very, very clear. They both had the passion for social justice at their own expense. And that passion that sort of drove them through their lives and in terms of the commitments they had, in terms of the country and loving, as Glance mentioned, loving our country so much and seeing that social justice happening. So Graeme I knew as a very sort of serious activist in South Africa and very disciplined and resilient. If you look at what exactly he's been through, he's really, and believing in that new South Africa that was so sure that it was going to happen, both him and Cheryl. And that's where I could see why she was so attracted and felt why this man won my sister's heart, because of that commitment he's got, and nothing will do other than complete social justice in South Africa. I got to know Graeme slightly differently in London when Cheryl was the High Commissioner, and it was quite nice to see a different side of Graeme because now the battle's been won. We have a new and a free South Africa. So I suddenly saw a very different Graeme. And going out to certain events or restaurants, one was, for instance, when we went to a restaurant we frequented a lot was Oxford Towers, and that's where Graeme discovered the green fairies. Some of you may know about that. Graeme with his green fairies, we left the restaurant and we decided also, all led by Graeme, to climb over some barricades because I don't know, most of you must know London and the Millennium Bridge, or as we called it, the Wobbly Bridge. And it wasn't open because they were doing works to fix the bridge. But Graeme decided, no, we can climb over the barricades and we have to go on the Wobbly Bridge. So, and then also there's Portobello Road, various other, elements that it was very nice to see, a less serious Graeme, that side of him, and I got to know Graeme better in London in terms of that. But that resilience and belief in terms of education, it gave him that time to explore as well in terms of education, what he saw the future for South Africa, and very heated debates. So that's a Graeme I sort of knew, and also, but that resilience and belief in his country never ever wavered, neither was Cheryl, obviously, being the High Commissioner. They were really a good couple for pushing that agenda forward for South Africa. And the other thing for me was, in terms of his resilience, again, it came up with when he was so ill. Last week in whole of Easter weekend with Cheryl, we were with Cheryl, my sister and myself, helping Cheryl with Graeme. And it was so sad to see this great mind in this body, and I felt like it was unfair. This man has achieved, he's done so much for us. He sacrificed himself for us. And why must he get this sort of disease and the pain and suffering he was in? And so, yes, it was a very tough one. And also for me, for us, it was very hard seeing our sister, You know, her heart is so broken with this, as much as we knew that Graeme's, you know, it was a degenerative disease, but when the moment came, we were not prepared. And I actually ended up flying back to London on Wednesday. Graeme was in hospital. He was again in the morning. It was not good. By 8 o'clock, he was better, lunchtime, and we said, yeah, the fight is back. I went to London. Of course, as you know now, with the South African variant, I had to self-isolate. So I went straight into hotel isolation at Heathrow Hotel until I got the call then Monday morning. I spoke to Cheryl the Thursday. She said he's on and off again. Friday morning, I get the call to say he's passed. So, you know, there's a sense of thank you for taking him out of his suffering, but still sadness. But also for me, it then was obviously a battle to come back to South Africa, to get approval from the government to let me come out and basically come back to South Africa. I was at another glitch when I got to the airport. There was a mechanical fault on the plane. So I had to change airlines quickly, jump to Ethiopian Air because I was going to fly with Swiss Air. But you know, to me, that was nothing. Nothing compared to what this man went through. To me, I wanted to pay my last respects to him and made that journey, COVID or no COVID. I had 2-3 masks on to protect myself. Airports, I went from, as I said, London to Addis, to Joburg, to Cape Town. But that, to my view, was nothing compared to what this man did for our country. And I can just say thank you to him. And Cheryl, thank you for standing with him. My sister's love for him has just been, I don't know if I could do that, but she's just remarkable. And Leah also, Leah, the carer. So thank you both for what you've done for him.
Liz and I decided, I'm Bev, Cheryl's sister. Liz and I decided to share because with her being in London, of course, we shared, I spent myself, Fred, and my son spent most of our time with Graeme. I met Graeme, the first time I met Graeme was when this little man was organizing the Freedom Run at the Samaj Center. And I just said, I'm not going to lose my heels for a freedom run. I'll rather do the sandwiches at the Samaj Center. And that's what I did, and Graeme knew me like that. Graeme referred to us as the Carolais. We, in turn, the sisters, referred to our spouses as the Aangenaaide Lappies. They even went as far in London. All the spouses decided to go to a pub in London to establish this society for abused husbands. I don't know how far they got in the pub that night with that. Yes, the Carolais like to celebrate. We celebrated achievements, Christmas, birthdays, and we shared all these days with Aubrey, Rosalie, and of course Graeme. And they loved our cooking. They always said they loved the Carolai cooking. Net in die athlon potte kan ons dit maak. Yes, we even one year hosted Caroline and Angus and Nigel from London, and we always had laughs during Christmas time. Fun and laughter. The highlight of Christmas days was, it was a tradition. With dessert, we open our gifts. And Graeme would also sit there like a little child waiting for his gift. And one year, we celebrated Christmas at Cape Point in the reserve. Rosalie and everybody was with us, and in the evening, 12 o'clock, we decided to open our gifts. And Graeme was also sitting there waiting anxiously for his gift. And Graeme ended up with in all the confusion, I gave Graeme the wrong gift because that is of wrapping the gifts 10 minutes before the time. Graeme ended with a pack of panties on his lap. And he said, this is my gift, I won't part with it. And in one of Graeme's birthdays as well, I remember, it was at Johnny de Lange's house. Yes, Johnny, you can look at me, you know what I'm talking about. We cannot, I won't go into detail because this whole streaming has no age restrictions. And the adjudicator was, lo and behold, Trevor Manuel. This challenge was between Graeme and I. I can only say Graeme recovered 2 days after that. And that's where Graeme knew don't mess with the Caroline sisters. Graeme enjoyed, as you can see on the pics, our family outings, a real Cape Flats around the peninsula trip. Used to get a taxi, and Graeme won't go without, he used to call it travel eggs. The boiled eggs. Graeme loved these boiled eggs on the outings. He used to call it travel eggs. And wherever we went, we made sure that Graeme had his travel eggs with him. And on the family outings, there was Kusista's chicken livers, his favorites. Then on a more serious note, education. Graeme and I used to have discussions about policing and always inquiring about my challenges I experienced being a principal at the township school. He and Cheryl also donated and invested a lot in the school. He played a big role in inspiring me to capacitate me as a leader. He encouraged me to achieve despite the challenges in the townships. Every year I couldn't wait to phone Graeme with our systemic results. Despite the school is in the township, our results were 98%. And Graeme was very proud of that. Graeme was so ecstatic when I phoned him to say that I won the Western Cape Principals of the Year award. That made Graeme really very happy. When we recently bought our home in Hermanus, we specifically looked for a house to suit Graeme because we knew we're going to spend a lot of time in Hermanus with him. And we were so fortunate that Christmas we could spend together with Graeme in Hermanus. And still he was waiting for his gift and that laughter when we opened the gifts. We were so blessed to have him with us as well. When Uncle Cyril locked us down and made the curfew for New Year's Eve, 12 o'clock, we decided we must make a plan because we never know with Graeme's situation if we're going to see him in the next year. So we wanted to be together 12 o'clock New Year's Eve as a family and with Graeme. And yes, we were blessed to have him with us. New Year's Eve, we lit the candle on the stoep in Hermanus, and we were so happy. Then we decided after that, because Cheryl, and I want to thank Cheryl for that, for trusting us with Graeme. Whenever Leah went on leave, we were the few people, Cheryl always said, I trust Graeme with you. Whenever she went on holiday, on working overseas or wherever, if Leah's not around, we look after Graeme because we knew exactly how to handle him. And then we decided to go on this road trip, now recently in April. We went to Neisner, Calitzdorp, Robertson, wherever. And we were on this road trip with Graeme. And at night, I don't know if you know that, Cheryl's secret. Cheryl was a DJ by trade in her days. And then at night, Graeme used to sit in Neisner. And Cheryl's the DJ, and Cheryl is up it. And Cheryl DJ for us, and we danced, and Graeme just sat there, and you could see he just laughed. And the same with my birthday, 2010, we decided to have this theme, the World Cup. You can see with on the pics, Adolf, in the orchestra, there's a pic with Graeme and Adolf watching the match. And Graeme just looked at us, this madness, everybody with this makarapas, and that was Graeme always just looking at the Caroline sisters, just silenced by us. So as Des mentioned, Easter weekend, Leah had to go back with her family, and we helped Cheryl to look because Graeme was very sick. And that was so sad to see Graeme suffering through the night. And eventually, I want to thank Mike, Cheryl's friend, the doctor. We eventually are struggling with Graeme the whole Saturday. Just to see Graeme in that state was so sad for us. To see him struggling to breathe, and we didn't know what to do. At the end, 12 o'clock the night, we decided to rush him to hospital. And there I could see the love Cheryl had for Graeme. We couldn't see. Cheryl was touching his face and she was saying, "I'm so sorry, Goga." She called him Goga and she said, "I'm so sorry, Goga, that you have to go through this." And we were all looking at Graeme. He was so sick. And then he was rushed to Constantiaberg. But seeing Graeme the day with his passing on, I looked and I said, "Thy will be done." And Graeme was so peaceful, no pain, even a smile on his face. And that is how I remember Graeme. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now share a video by the group of people we call the Young Lions. They're not so young any longer, but we've heard Comrade Angie refer to the piece written by the former West Coast students. It's probably one of the most moving tributes that I've seen in the past week, where the young people were at the time, as they say, 13, 14, 15, when Graeme mentored them. They have prepared a video. So, Aki, you ready for that video, the clip?
I'm going to focus on a short period of Graeme's life, but one which had and continues to have a profound impact on a wide range of people. In a beautifully written tribute to Graeme published earlier this week, former leaders in the Western Cape Students' Congress, WEXCO, described the impact GB, as he has always fondly been called, had on their lives, and they spoke about his role in the Arab winter schools held in the 1980s for students. These winter schools were organized by Arab, a small organization formed in the early 1980s by Trevor, Manuel, Nicky Rousseau and others. At the time of the winter schools, it was led by Nasikh Jaffer, whose calm leadership steered the organization even while being hunted by security police. By the mid-1980s, there was close interaction with the UDF and the NECC after it was established. Graeme, being on the executive of both these organizations, not so subtly ensured Arab-made support for students an absolute priority. Graeme loved participating in that space. It was as if all his talents came to fruition. After his years of being banned and the isolation that meant, he was able to immerse himself in the things he cared so deeply about.
Cheryl, to you, my dear sister, I want to say my deepest sympathy. Be strong at this hour. To the Bloch family, I want to also say I am sorry for your loss. I've known Comrade Graeme, like most of us young lions, when I was the revolutionary age of only 14, 15 years old. And although many have spoken about his teachings, his training, yes, but also when we as WEXCO, the Western Cape Student Congress, the two things that stand out for me is when in 1989 we dealt with a very difficult issue around the national question, where so-called colored leaders and Black African leaders within the student movement were at loggerheads around race and the tension that was there, and the intervention from Graeme and Cheryl as representatives from the UDF to manage that process was quite instructive for me, and will always leave an indelible mark on my consciousness about the sensitivity around race, and they dealt with it so well, and I will always remember Graeme for that.
As student and youth leadership of the mid-1980s, Graeme instilled in us a fire that turned us into lifelong learners and social justice activists. It is only apt for our generation to pick up Graeme's spear. Today, unlike in the 80s, we are the mothers, we are the fathers, we are the grandparents. We have to continue the fight that we have not completed. So comrades, we must make a call to action. And if we say a call to action, it's not about taking to social media only. It's about getting our hands dirty, going back to the teachings of Graeme, and organizing our people, going into the various fields that we are at, and bringing about real and true change for our people. If we are advocating for change in policies, we have to walk those in policy making. We have to ensure that we implement it. We have to ensure that change is swift. We have to ensure that we bring about real and true freedom for our people. That is what Graeme would like for us to do. So let us go back. Let us do what we do best, and that is to work in the interest of our poor, of our marginalized, of our people yearning for real and true freedom. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. My name is Kgalema, and I represent the student movement in the Western Cape in the 1980s. And it is in that capacity that I wish to express our condolences to Cheryl and the entire family. And we also wish to say to her that we pray with you. We pray for you. We love you. And above all, we feel you. We feel your pain. And we feel your loss. Now, quite a bit has been said and written about Graeme's life since his sad passing. And all of that is true, can attest to that. But what I want to focus on is an area that is less celebrated, that is less known about this man's contribution to the struggle, especially in our province, the Western Cape. Not many people know how much of his time and energy in between his detentions without trial and his banning orders, of course, Graeme actually spent organizing and hosting youth and student training workshops, winter schools, summer schools, and all sorts of training gatherings throughout the Western Cape. And the principal beneficiaries of his efforts were, of course, the leadership of the student movement at the time. Now, when asked many years ago why he insisted on devoting so much of his time in remote conference locations around the province with young people, Graeme's response was commonsensical and yet profound. he reasoned that the only way to comprehensively refute the regime's racially divisive intent was to actively cultivate, curate, and invest in a generation of anti-apartheid activists armed with a far more superior set of values. This being non-racialism, non-sexism, dedication to the poor and most vulnerable members of our society, democracy, and ethical leadership. He knew that the careful cultivation of a large contingent of young people imbued with these values would lead to the ultimate demise of the apartheid system. Not only that, he also knew that in time, these young people would constitute the bedrock of a future post-apartheid dispensation. Now, as a white South African, Graeme could have sat still and quietly gone on with his life and making full use of the privileges that came with whiteness in apartheid South Africa. But this was not his style, it was not in his culture. He insisted on choosing the difficult path, the path of sacrifice, path of courage, torture, detention without trial, and constant harassment and repression by the regime. All of this in pursuit of freedom for all and not some, justice, equality, and human solidarity. From this act of courage, the liberation movement in South Africa gained a solid, principled, and deeply committed cadre, and there aren't many of those these days. And in paying homage to Graeme and his contribution to this country, we rededicate ourselves to the values he stood for and to the attainment of his dream of a non-racial, non-sexist democracy that benefits all of our people and not just some.
I flicked open his book, The Toxic Mix, yesterday, and inside the front cover, GB had scrawled a message to Glynis, and it ends with, "Let's keep making a difference." I can imagine Graeme somewhere saying to us all today, let's keep making a difference.
Your spear will not be forgotten, Graeme. May you rest in peace, my brother. Thank you.
We're now invited to listen to the hymn, Liza Liz in Dingalako, and we will be led in the singing of it by Zinzi Nogavu. We now invite Lyle Bethlehem and Rashida Shabuddin to underscore the spiritual thread that has been finding its way throughout this gathering.
We read in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 16, Tzedek, Tzedek tirdof, lema'an tichyeh. Justice, justice shall you pursue, that you may live. Graeme's life is a lesson in the meaning of this verse. Why does the Torah say, justice, justice shall you pursue that you may live? It might have said, pursue justice because it's what God expects of you. Pursue justice because it's right. But instead it says, pursue justice that you may live. This is because the Torah knows, and Graeme knew, that to live without the pursuit of justice is no life at all. In particular, to live in an unjust society, to benefit from it, to enjoy its privileges, and not to fight injustice is no life at all. You might put one foot in front of the other. Indeed, you might live a life of great luxury. But at the end of your life, what would you have achieved? What would you have contributed? What life would you have lived? And why does the Torah repeat the word justice? To teach us that justice is not to be taken lightly. It is not something to which we can pay lip service. The pursuit of justice is heavy. It involves risk, sacrifice, hardship, anguish. From Graeme, it required detention, banning, torture, no less. But pursue justice he did, with all his heart, with all his soul, with every fiber of his being. There is another sense in which Graeme lived the meaning of this verse. The word tzedek in Hebrew means justice, but it also means righteousness. It also implies compassion. The word tzedek is repeated in the verse also to teach us that both aspects matter. We must pursue justice without flinching, but we must never become hardened. We must fight with all our being, but we must never lose our humanity. We must meet the world with kindness, just like Graeme did. Truly, Graeme Bloch pursued a life of justice, and what a life he led. Before offering the prayer for Graeme's soul, his neshama, I want to reflect for a moment on the extraordinary quality of Graeme and Cheryl's relationship. Somehow, in the division and chaos of life under apartheid, Graeme and Cheryl found each other. His special qualities found their match in Cheryl. His courage, his commitment, his unwavering sense of principle, his love of nature, his profound ability to love. All of these called out to the universe and were answered in equal measure in Cheryl Carolus. These last few years, Cheryl's steadfast love has been an inspiration and a lesson to us all. The Jewish prayer for the soul, the neshama, is called El Maleh Rachamim, and I will recite it now in Hebrew. El Maleh Rachamim, shochen b'meromim, hametzeh nemenucha nechona, al kanfei hashechina, במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמת גרהם בלוך שהלך לעולמו בעבור שנדבו צדקה בעד הזכרת נשמתו בגן עדן תהיה מנוחתו, לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח על משכבו בשלום, ונאמר Amen. The Kaddish, the mourner's prayer, will now be led by Graeme's sister Erica. If you are familiar with the prayer, please answer Amen. Aki.
Yit gadal v'yit gadash shemei rabba.
Amen.
Be'alma divrach chirutei, ve'yamlich malchutei b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei d'chol Beit Israel ba'agala u'vizman ka'eriv ve'yimru Amen.
Amen.
Yehi shmei rabba mevorach le'alam ul'almei almaya yitbarach ve'yishtabach ve'yitba'ar ve'yitrumam ve'yitnaseh ve'yitadar ve'yitaleh ve'yitalal shmei d'kodesha berechu le'ela min kol birchata ve'shirata tushbechata ve'nechemata da'amiran ba'alma ve'emru Amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya ve'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Israel ve'emru Amen. Oseh shalom bimrumav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Israel ve'emru Amen.
At times of difficulty or transition, we say to one another, Chazak, Chazak, v'nit chazek. May we be strong and strengthen one another. So may it be for Cheryl. So may it be for Graeme's extended families. So may it be for us all.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. All praise be to God for the wonderful life of love, service, and commitment that has been lived by Comrade Graeme Bloch. I had the honor of knowing Comrade Graeme as a matric student in 1985, an alumnus of UWC, but mostly as a former member of the Call of Islam. In all of those, my young self then could not call him friend, but what he was for me and for thousands of other anti-apartheid activists, he was a leader, a mentor, a hero. And for the many who called him that, I stand here today only because you can't due to COVID. You know, Comrade Cheryl, if it was not for this pandemic, this church would have been filled to the rafters. Looking back, my generation in the Call of Islam learned our commitment to justice because we saw people like Comrade Graeme living out the interpretation of the Quranic principles of justice, and we said to ourselves, oh, this is what doing justice looks like. The Quran has three clear injunctions to justice. Firstly, the Quran says, O you who believe, stand out firmly for justice as witnesses to God. People like Comrade Graeme showed us that injustice was identifiable by its uniforms and Caspers, by its tear gas and rubber bullets, by its jail and banning orders, because he endured all of these. But he showed us that it can be defeated when he exhorted us in 1989 in the MAE church in Athlone when he said, defy, defy, defy. And so together, Muslims, Christians, Hindus, Jews, atheists, we launch a moral offensive for the final defeat of apartheid. But secondly, the Quran then tells us, O you who believe, stand up for justice and let not the hatred of people towards you swerve you from justice. In the transition from apartheid to democracy, we needed to work with those who were the perpetrators of injustice so that we could navigate a path to peace and justice. Even here, Comrade Graeme came to calm our unsettled hearts and fill our heads with strategic vision to prepare us for the conference for a democratic future. And thirdly, the Quran tells us, O you who believe, stand up for justice even against your own. Even for this unthinkable scenario, Comrade Graeme led the way. When those who yesterday were with you in the trenches, but today have become corrupt, we must still stand for justice. And when those who yesterday fought white supremacy, but today perpetrate GBV and sexual abuse, we must still stand for justice. So Comrade Graeme's lessons and inspirations live on. His legacy needs to be a living one, for his task and our task is not done. We gather only to support you, Comrade Cyril, and family, and the families that are here and the friends that are here. We must pledge to continue Comrade Graeme's legacy by pledging to continue working for a just world. May God reward Comrade Graeme abundantly, bring tranquility to the hearts of Comrade Cheryl, family and friends, inshallah, God willing. Ambakashli, Comrade Graeme.
There's a video that we were not able to play earlier. We will now listen and watch to it. It's one with the children in it.
because you've got this big two-story high void space which is the entry. It catches the light at certain times of day, so you get the light from the interior of the house. And use some timber cantilevered stairs to give that space a little bit more, even though it's a very minimal space. The brief from the client was really simple.
It is perhaps fortuitous that we were not able to play this clip earlier, because it's such a lovely celebration of the children and the smiles and laughter that they brought forth in the life of Graeme. And it's also good to be mindful of the flowers of our revolution as we now listen to the words from our former president, Kgalema Motlanthe.
Program Director, Comrade Cheryl Carolas, and members of the bereaved families, members of academia, former students, leaders and veterans of our movement, comrades, ladies and gentlemen. The union in marriage between Comrade Graeme Bloch and his dear wife, Comrade Cheryl Carolas, came about in the heat of the struggle against apartheid oppression and for peace, freedom, and a better life for all. It was a union based on solid ground of mutual affection, which endured the most severe of trials, tribulations, and harassment. No amount of painful afflictions could undermine the bond between these two remarkable comrades. Hence, the love and dedication to Graeme by Cheryl has been abiding, exemplary, and wonderful to witness. To the bereaved families of Bloch and Carolas, we convey our heartfelt sympathies, and we ask that you take solace in the knowledge that we share your pain and condole with you. Comrade Graeme was not only extremely studious, but also practical, for he understood only too well that knowledge is verified in experience. He had infinite confidence and abiding faith in humanity. Fidel Castro taught us that revolutionaries do not struggle for honor or glory or to occupy a place in history. And so, Comrade Graeme occupies, and will always occupy a great place in history precisely because that was not important to him, because he was always absolutely selfless. And so his life is sure to become an example to posterity. Throughout the past few days since his passing, we have read and listened to the glowing tributes from his comrades, fellow academics, former students, and just about all those with the fullest knowledge of his attributes. All of the tributes are true and well deserved. However, there is no doubt that he would have been embarrassed by such attention because he was truly humble and modest in his demeanor. He was the embodiment of all that was noble and glorious in the progressive movement. He was upright, principled, an industrious cadre who dedicated his life to the production of knowledge and the development of education. He was an independent intellectual who would not yield before the onslaught of reaction. Comrade Graeme lived by the following maxim: the great aim of education is not knowledge but action. He knew what to look for and what to do. Program director, education thus becomes the tipping point that determines the trajectory of one's life and choices. The consequences of a nation's education system has the influence to determine who may struggle to survive from those who have the tools to thrive. As the youth prepared to take forward the struggle of rebuilding our nation, Comrade Graeme believed that young people should be afforded the right to anchor their efforts in intellectualism. However, almost 3 decades after democracy, many youth are still struggling to access education, and there are many signs that the struggle is far from over. In addition, the legacy of racial discrimination in the education system persists, a constant issue that Comrade Graeme fought against his entire career, characterized by poor outcomes, overcrowded classrooms, inadequate facilities and learning materials. These challenges still loom over us for all these years. Many schools that serve our poorest communities rely on poorly maintained infrastructure and a serious lack of teaching resources, and hungry children are forced to play and learn in less than adequate environments. This is an education with systemic shortcomings which continue to create barriers to the project of nation building and social cohesion. In many respects, the presence of history evidently still determines who has access to education and who does not. Corruption, gender-based violence, crime, divisions along historical lines of race and class, and an overwhelming amount of suffering continue to haunt us today. Coupled with global crises of disease and climate change, these failures of society and our leaders actively increase already disproportionate levels of poverty and affect at risk populations the most. Comrade Graeme recognized that ending poverty, inequality, and other deprivations go hand in hand with integrated strategies that improve education, justice, and economic growth. He advocated for education and youth development to be linked
to the institutional frameworks of capacity building and inclusivity. In his paper, The Liberatory Discourse of Education and Discourse in South Africa, Comrade Graeme states that, and I quote, "Education is seen as releasing potential and allowing individual and social advance. Yet, sociologically, it can be seen how education systems can and do contribute to reinforcing social differentiation, locking poor communities in inequality, and even reproducing racial inequalities. Certainly reinforcing class and gender differentiation against constitutional guarantees of equality and human rights imperatives," close quote. As we lay to rest this man of steel, we must guard against conceit and complacency, mendacity and false claims, taking a seat amongst the scornful, negative ideas and energies, factionalism and gossip, political intolerance and ethnic chauvinism, as well as greed and corruption. Beware the wedge driver. Comrade Graeme never applied to others the standards that he refused to accept for himself. He was always in the front line, where manhood and consciousness is tested. The only place to bury persecutions and burden of ages. The only place to declare names immortal. Because Comrade Graeme would have explained that all of the aforestated tendencies are arch enemies of unity. May his soul rest in peace. Long live the undying spirit of Comrade Graeme. Long live. For as Thomas Campbell asserted, to live in hearts we leave behind is not to die. And I thank you for your attention.
Friends, the Machinglani of time is calming down. We seem to be catching up to our sister Edith. I want to say that keeping time in this cathedral is like sometimes trying to take a cat for a walk. It's very difficult. About 2 years ago, I was verbally abused by a brother priest. When I cautioned him about his lack of brevity, he told me that time is a Western concept. But we are on time, and so I call upon my brother and friend of the family, Trevor Manuel.
Thank you very much, Father Michael. Cheryl and the Carolus family, the Bloch family, comrades and friends. Cheryl, I want to thank you for the honor to deliver an eulogy, because it's a very special honor that you bestow on us. And I do so on my own behalf and on behalf of my boys and Maria. The eulogy is not easy because so much has been said, and I said to Lance in the week that what he posted on Facebook last week was perhaps the most complete eulogy, a tribute to his brother. I will spare you the time, but invite you to read Lance's tribute. In just a few words, captured the essence of love, of bravery, of the spirit of Graeme. Something that he took forward in his address to us this morning. But I want to draw from that with deference and respect to Lance and just try and share some of the observations. And the first of these is that message of profound love from a brother. The love between the Bloch siblings has always been unbreakable, incredibly warm and incredibly strong. It's something that was forged around that dinner table in Walminster Road. And as you've heard this morning, Rosalie and Cecil provided for this bond with a combined brood of 9 offspring. The Love and Commitment saw an annual event known as the Bloch Fest. Quite unusual, but it annually afforded the siblings and the spouses and the children and what Bev described as the aangenaide lappies to come together, to love, to eat, to argue, and to celebrate being Blochs. I know that Graeme looked forward to the event because of the deep and raucous familiar love. Also embraced within this love are people who haven't been part of Graeme's life for a very long time. Alan Hirsch posted this week from London a very moving tribute that speaks of a friendship that has endured, by my calculation, about 51 years. Then there is that very special love between Cheryl and Graeme. So big, so open, so deep and so durable. There's got to be a big novel in there somewhere, Cece. But it's in the love of life that there were people, some of whom we've heard this morning, and I know, and I want to take this moment, Fred, we reached out to a number of people to try and record messages, but this problem of time, Father, saw some of these people's messages, and I think it'll be used on Facebook and elsewhere in the next period, not shared with us. But some of the people who'd shared, I asked them what they read to Graeme. And one of these is Krista Kuljan. And I was hoping that she'd say that Graeme had demanded Marx and Lenin and Gramsci and Polantzis and so on, but no, it wasn't to be. It was some of the funniest stories ever, and she would read and he would sit there and guffaw, and that was the essence of life. Zulu said that it was in fact Ben Travato that he liked most. And I think it speaks to the totality of the person that Graeme has been throughout his life. The person that Lance spoke of as being humorous was actually incredibly funny. And it was there in every aspect, and I've never seen anybody else worn as smartly by a Panama hat as Graeme was. And I think we all knew Graeme in his Panama was a complete delight. And in fact, amongst the most raucous photographs of Graeme, not fit to show in this great cathedral, Father, was the visit that Cheryl and Graeme made to the Rocky Horror Picture Show just before the lockdown. It's an absolute delight. But it confirmed that wicked humor was not stemmed by his illness. As Lance wrote last week, stricken by that terrible neurodegenerative disease which left him with a brilliant mind and a wasting body, is a statement, I think, and I know that Bevy had gone into this, that we must try and understand. In my mind, one of the greatest writers of the 20th century was a man called Tony Judd, who passed away about a decade ago from a similar disease. In his case, his diagnosis was early, and he took steps to record what was happening in his mind as his body wasted. He was able to capture some of what was happening to him in that wonderful book which he called The Memory Chalet. And Tony writes, I quote, "The salient quality of this particular neurodegenerative disorder is that it leaves your mind clear to reflect on past, present, and future, but steadily deprives you of any means of converting those reflections into words. First, you can no longer write independently, requiring an assistant or a machine in order to record your thoughts. Then your legs fail and you cannot take in new experiences, except at the cost of such logistical complexity that the mere fact of mobility becomes the object of attention rather than the benefits that mobility can confer." He continues, "For someone wishing to remain a communicator of words and concepts, this poses an unusual challenge." And then he continues, "I think I came across the answer to this dilemma quite by chance. I realized some months into the disease that I was writing whole stories in my head in the course of the night." In the 7 long years during which Graeme's body wasted, we lost the opportunity to hear from him in order to unlock those whole stories that were shaping in his mind. As Krista Kuljan said, Graeme referred continually to the novel he wanted to write. And I think that the novel was actually the great love story. We've seen, but we need to know a lot more about. Much has been focused on the empowerment of young people. And I think in that regard, Graeme's contribution has been legendary. I have on a previous occasion, I think it may have been the funeral service of Rosalie and Aubrey, shared my gratitude for the way in which Graeme empowered me. It was 1982, and I was a township boy with a huge chip on my shoulder. Graeme then unbanned, taught a postgrad class at UCT, and invited me to address the class. I was genuinely afraid of the big names in that class. These were people who ate Marx for breakfast and Polantzas for tea. I was afraid that they would tear me to shreds. And Graeme sat with me and patiently walked the journey with me and helped me to gather my thoughts on paper, to anticipate the questions, and to prepare for the curveballs. Needless to say, that engagement with Graeme left an indelible impression on me. He gave me the confidence to pull it off, and I think that kind of empowerment lives with one forever. And I think it's a different reflection of what the not-so-young Lions told us about earlier. But it was to formal education and schooling that he committed his intellectual being. His relationship with schools and schooling was not merely a passing intellectual interest. He was arrested at Witwatersrand High in 1985 and detained thereafter. His work with young student leaders was not just about teaching them to navigate, it was also about his intense learning to work to narrowing the gap between schools for the more affluent and schools where parents actually cannot exercise the choice. Education was obviously the great differentiator in Graeme's life, as a demonstration of his profound commitment to lifelong learning, a phrase you would have heard repeatedly this morning. At one level, it resulted in Graeme working to design and implement postgrad programs at universities to assist school principals to transition from the chalkboard to managing complex institutions. Moreover, the passion that Graeme put into improving schooling resulted in that body of research described at one place, the toxic mix. I was surprised that Angie spoke of Graeme's bipolar approach to education, but it's all there in the book called The Toxic Mix. Reading through the many questions that Graeme posed repeatedly about education for transformation, we're compelled to take an approach to all of society and not merely to an abstracted focus on education. Again, Tony Judd raised these observations about education in a manner that applies anywhere through and beyond the schooling system. Tony wrote, "Universities are elitist. They're about selecting the most able cohort of a generation and educating them to their ability, breaking open the elite and making it consistently anew. Equality of opportunity and equality of outcome are not the same thing. A society divided by wealth and inheritance cannot address this injustice by camouflaging it in educational institutions. By denying distinctions of ability and by restricting selective opportunity, while favoring a steadily widening income gap in the name of the free market. This is mere cant and hypocrisy," unquote. I've been amazed at the sense of symmetry between the lives of Graeme and Tony Judd, the thinking about society, the thinking about the forces that change society. It was all there in every aspect of Graeme's life. I think it was an argument he made not just about education as part of freedom, but what happens when the education system is not tended to in the detail that produces outcomes that impact on what happens in society. His concern and the lasting responsibility is to move the discourse beyond the platitudes of fine-sounding slogans and generalities, deal with the tough issues, mere cant and hypocrisy. This was a site of struggle that Graeme waged for as long as his body would let him do so. The hardest part late in his life was observing what was happening and then being unable to act to do what was necessary. The struggle would continue for as long as he observed the wrongs and committed to right them. This past weekend, a comrade also happens to be wheelchair bound from Saldanha Bay, Maxwell Moss, sent me that photograph. It was on the screen earlier of Graeme being arrested by those cops who looked very scared of this small guy because he had a poster that read "Scrap Section 29." And Maxwell's caption to me was, "This is what I call being brave." That bravery defined Graeme, not only when the photograph was taken, but throughout all of his life. It was that bravery that sustained him. It was that bravery that kept him going. Many of us were amazed by the spirit with which he and Cheryl dealt with this terrible degenerative disorder. Nothing stood in their way. Their visits to every part of South Africa continued as recent as 2 weeks ago. And so I think we pay tribute to the best amongst us, the best of our generation. And in paying tribute to Graeme, I think we want to pay a very, very special tribute to Cheryl for the depth of that love, for the depth of her commitment, for the fact that nothing stood in her way. They'd pitch up at our house, wheelchair in the boot. Cheryl would rip out the wheelchair, pick up Graeme, put him in the wheelchair, and we'd share a few hours together. That was the spirit of their lives, and so thank you very much for that. But also thank you very much to these remarkable families for the sustenance, the support, the love. It's very, very, very special. The Father, to you and the Cathedral, thanks so much for hosting us, and Fred, thanks so much for putting all of this together, and Edie, for sitting where you are and calling us to order. Thank you very much. Hamba kahle, lala kuxolo, kawe, laba kawe.
Thank you, Trevor. We now invite Sean to provide the vote of thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, and honored friends, guests, on behalf of the Bloch family and Cheryl as well, I wish to extend a short vote of, or note and vote of thanks to the following people. Fred Daniels, who in Yiddish would call an absolute mensch. These are the co-working people with me on this funeral working committee. Trevor Manuel, Reverend Sid Luckett, brother Guy, that's my real brother Guy, Professor Edith, right behind me, the Dean Michael Weeder and his team, plus for the use of St. George's Cathedral, which is such an appropriate venue. Sound and Media, thank you very much, Aki Khan and his team, Motlanthe and team, Palesa, Angela Mattia, all speakers today who need no further mention, the high-level ANC leadership deputation as well for coming here from Johannesburg and afar, the Constantiaberg team who were so professionally looking after Graeme in his final hours and days, Leah, Graeme's wonderful carer right to his last breath, and Dr. Mike, all those who've donated to charity in lieu of sending flowers, all Graeme's wonderful, supportive friends. It's made his life so rich and happy. Also, I need to acknowledge the messages of condolences from the President Cyril Ramaphosa and also the former President Thabo Mbeki as well. But finally, and most of all, I'd like to thank Cheryl herself for loving and caring of our brother in such an unbelievable and loving way, right to the end. Cheryl, whether you like it or not, despite Graeme's passing, you still remain married to the Bloch family. Thank you all.
Thank you, my brother, by a spiritual DNA. We now have the moment of committal where the coffin will be censed with incense. And it's not our attempt to colonize Graeme in any way for Anglicanism, but it's just the Anglican way of saying we like you, and we actually do love you and we respect you, but overall it's also the recognition and the affirmation that divine love is ever present. Graeme, may the angels lead you into paradise. The martyrs come to welcome you and take you to that holy city, the Al-Quds, the new and eternal Jerusalem. May the choirs of angels welcome you there as is poor. There may you know the bliss and peace of paradise. And so, beloved, I invite you to stand for the blessing. May you be blessed with discomfort and easy answers, half-truths and superficiality, so that you will live deep in your heart. May you be blessed with anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people and of the earth, so that you will work for justice, equity, and peace. May you be blessed with tears to shed for those who suffer, so you will reach out your hand to comfort them and change their pain into joy. And may you be blessed with the foolishness to think that you can make a difference in the world, so you will do all the things which others say cannot be done. Iti nsikelela katika ngamana onke, uise unyana na moya o ingwele, ibetlana na niangona pakade. Amen. We now invite a friend of the family and a comrade, Paul Mashatile, to come forward for the flag ceremony. And also our beloved Gary Cruiser. Thank you. Just to inform you that the hearse will now proceed to the Motlanthe crematorium for the private cremation. And I've been asked by the organizers to keep you mindful that when we process out, that you keep the desired social distance, and that when we gather outside, and it might sound like a state of emergency notice, but please try your best to not to cluster and keep the desired social distance. And then also the following person, just to remind you that you are the pallbearers, if you can come forward. And that's Trevor Manuel, Paul Mashatile, Mtebisi Squacha, Ibrahim Rasul, Johnny Delanga, and Lerumo Kalako. Cameron Dagmo. And then the wonderful musicians that we have here today under the baton of Adolf Tellen. And then we have Mike Rossi, Lilavan Gangan, Sarah Blake, and the beautiful Zenzi, who would also sing Tina Siswe as the coffin recesses. And then just to be mindful that the pallbearers in current formation will take us to the link, and the young lions in their present format will then take us to the hearse.
See